introduce Randy Muench. He's the one who'll be moderating this panel. It's about innovations in network and connectivity. Randy works for Communications Infrastructure Corporation, which tells all about him. He's been working telecommunications sector and for 25 years, and MSCI Communications, Clearter, Expedius, CFN services, and a brief employment for himself in consulting communications companies, and that's all.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our panel. How about if we let everybody on the panel introduce themselves? Start with Matt.
Sure. Matt Haraburda, president of XR Trading. XR Trading's a local proprietary trading firm, mostly focused in futures, but we are also equity option market makers and active in the equity markets as well.
I'm Dan Penley. I'm the director of Algorithmic Trading and Execution at Spot Trading, which is a mid-sized firm here in Chicago. We sort of specialize in equity options. We also trade on CME and CFE and do some futures stuff. We're not big internationally.
I'm Colin Thomson from Access Partnership. I'm the director for regulatory engineering. What does that mean? I've been involved in getting the radio spectrum approvals for a number of the networks in Europe and beyond. Yep.
Hello. Yeah, hi, my name is Jay Lawrence. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for NexxCom Wireless. We are a broadband, high-performance wireless networking company, vertically integrated through proprietary technology, through a lot of R&D over the last several years, a lot of new stuff coming that we'll talk about on today's panel. HFT is one of the practices that we service, where low latency is a premium, but we also do a lot in the carrier world where both bandwidth and availability are equal in that importance. So we bring an interesting perspective, I think, from the standpoint of a technology-enabled service.
Alex Pilosov, Windy Apple. We built the first microwave New York to Chicago back in 2010, and kind of started this arms race for low latency wireless, and we generally stay on the R&D side of things and trying to be the first ones to do the crazy idea of the day, and that's kind of my focus on this panel, what's next.
Thank you. So we only have about 40 minutes. Our topic is innovation. We'll do our best to stay on topic, and hopefully everyone will leave with one or two things that they find really interesting and maybe new. We've got a great cross-section on the panel. If you're in the user community out there, we've got service provider representatives that hopefully can give you some insight. And if you're from the service providers out there, we've got two gentlemen from the user community, and maybe they can offer you some guidance on what you should be focusing on to better serve their market and let you get some economic gain. So with that, let's build into innovation. Let's start with, before we start talking about what's coming and what we should be doing, let's start with what works best now. I'll ask a user and a service provider to weigh in. So let's start with you, Alex. What's working well now out there?
I mean, we all know that microwave and wireless is working. 2 years ago, if you ask people here, that we would say, oh, we don't know, not proven, it's still up in the air, literally. Today, everybody is doing it. It's a mature technology, so there is no questions about what's working. It's definitely working.
Excellent. Matt, from the user side.
Certainly with that, I mean, microwave and millimeter technologies definitely work, and they're here to stay. I think what is working. You do have one of the topics we're going to talk about a lot is bandwidth. I mean, you do have the reality of having to deal with much lower lower bandwidth availability, and I think if you've been paying attention to the space and are using technologies, you've definitely had to do that work, and it works. You can use 10 megabits or very little market data, whatever kind of services you're using in an effective way, but you got to do a lot of work on the other end. So I think that works.
Thank you. In fact, that probably leads to our next question. So over the last 2 years, this market has really developed, the bandwidth, the wireless market for use in this industry. And now that it's matured, where do we go from here? What do users need? What are you looking for next? Dan, let's start with you.
Sure. In a lot of ways, one, I think it's to the 2-year thing, it's definitely been very surprising how fast some of this has picked up for people that haven't been involved in sort of leading the way on some of this technology stuff. I remember microwaves were at my firm, which wasn't particularly high frequency minded, 3 years ago, sort of used microwaves as like a punchline, like we'll never do that. And now, we're looking at all sorts of different providers, and NASDAQ's coming through and pitching microwaves. So it just sort of goes to show how widely sort of that's being used now. That said, I think if anything, a lot of this new technology has sort of forced the user community, if you will, to make some decisions about what their identity is as a trading firm. It's not one size fits all necessarily. For example, speaking on the bandwidth topic, as equity option market makers, you can see studies, there's just massive amounts of data coming out, and I can't imagine that not going over fiber unless something, spectacular comes out. So I think essentially things like expanding bandwidth on wireless lines is something that is very interesting. To the extent, new, faster technologies come out, I think that can be interesting, although I do think there's some trade-offs we found between the undeterministic nature of a lot of the exchanges and the gateways into the exchanges and sort of that relationship with the amount of time saved through new technology that does make me think beyond sort of the widely touted speed of light limit, that there actually are approaching like a limit of sort of value add on, at least on the speed side.
Thank you. Matt, do you have anything to add to that? What do users need? What do you need? What do you need next from the service providers in the audience?
I think that I think it's fair to say. I mean, sometimes you hear like when you talk about wireless network connectivity. Well, it's kind of done. That might be true to some extent from a first mover advantage, whether that's people building their own networks or kind of the very first service providers. But there's a tremendous amount of work to do in that space. I mean, we're always shopping and paying attention to what's available and what's out there, and there's so much stuff that's not built yet that's in the works. There's so many paths to straighten up. There's offerings that just don't exist yet. So I think that in a lot of ways, things are just kind of starting, and now it's more of a phase where people building smart businesses and understanding those needs. So nothing too specific as far as what I need, but it's I'd like to see the space mature even more. So then we get down to price points. You can have a confidence to buy. I mean, like when a space is moving very fastly, very quickly. A lot of times as a trading firm, like, we're eager to invest and we're eager to use something, but, does it pay to wait 3 months, and see if those guys get that thing done and how that's going to work. So, I think as the space matures a little bit, you'll find trading firms, with a lot more confidence to buy things, and then you'll get other levels of users interested in the space. For what we do, having very fast network connectivity is very important. We need to be able to compete with the best of the best. But as with most technologies, as things mature and you see it get to price points that are more palatable, more and more users will start to adapt it. Whether it's co-location or just automated strategies, period, or what have you. So, and I think it's there's a lot of potential demand still.
Thank you. Before we move into innovation, I want to take that same question kind of from the service provider's view. So from a service provider's view, over the last 2 years, the market has really developed. And how have customers changed? Has regulatory kept up? That kind of thing. Jay, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So I think the client base has changed in terms of a couple of different areas. One is they've just become a more sophisticated buyer. As I look at our carrier or our enterprise type clients, they kind of just want to know, do I get a circuit, does it work, am I happy, and they move on. When we're dealing with the HFT community, it is really almost talking to a physicist who's got a lot of in-depth questions that they want to have answered to their satisfaction. So it is a far more sophisticated buying pool, which I think is good because the exchange from a technology provider, which is how we view ourselves, to a customer who we want to be in the forefront of servicing them, we get a lot of intelligence just by having that exchange. So I think the sophistication has certainly improved. We all know volumes are down and volatility is down, and the market's been in a different place than it was 3 or 4 years ago, but that is affecting people's buying patterns a little bit as well. So we're doing a number of things to help to support that, and I'm glad to hear both of these guys talk about bandwidth and price, because as the market matures and you get a more savvy supplier suite, which I think has evolved over the last 24 months, those two components are essential. Some of the things that NexxCom is working on and has done is we are working to advance the performance of our radios. That will mean less actual electronics and networks, hence cost of networks go down. We're also working on more more performance in the modem. We've got a 10 gigabit per second millimeter wave modem that is on the bench. That will bring cost per bit down because you don't have a 10x cost in hardware increase. It also brings latency performance into a better domain on the metro side of the world. We are further to that engaging with our clients, not just on a turnkey build it for them basis. We're now building networks on a risk basis and selling those by the drink, where we're not asking people to be locked into multi-year contracts. We're asking people to sign up, try the service, kick the tires, and we believe that the way that these things are architected with the best radio engine, which is what we look at our radios as, of the engines in the car. You put a lawnmower engine in a Ferrari shell, you just got a very slow Ferrari. We got a very powerful engine that drives these networks, and we believe that by furthering that, which will be coming as we talk further through this panel in other areas, that is going to contribute to the kinds of features, the kinds of capabilities, and again, in low latency, we were saying this 2-3 years ago, that if your network is down and it's not deterministic and it's not highly available, and you're down, latency is infinity, so average that.
Are you doing all that because the customers are asking different questions now? Or is it just the natural evolution of where it turned into?
Well, we have a little bit of a different cut at this than I think the average guy in the space, because a good component of our business is non-HFT. So we're dealing as a carrier for the brand named carriers you'd hear here in the States and in Europe and other places. So that certainly has driven our culture to look towards quality, not just speed. But as we've talked with and learned from our clients, and they have become more sophisticated in the failure modalities of wireless, wireless doesn't just go down for a couple days like when you put a backhoe through a cable. Wireless burps when the weather comes in and it's pushing it to the edge of whatever link margin you might have. So you've got a different phenomenology to contend with, and there's nothing worse than if you're someone expecting to be able to do one thing and then expecting a second later to be able to undo it, and Mother Nature has decided to ruin your day. That can create a very severe problem. So it's really been kind of a cross-section of learning with the market of HFT, but also bringing to it some of the, I would say, sage experiences that we've had working with the carrier market, where it's availability and bandwidth more than it is latency. They candidly don't care about that. The two of them have played well together, and I think as this market's matured, we've been able to bring that to the forefront of the discussion.
Dan, you mentioned earlier in your firm that you've changed. It was a punchline 2 years ago, and now you're looking at it as, or you're using it in a way to make your company be more successful. Is that the only change, just that everybody else is doing it, and so you see how it can be implied, or has your firm or has the market changed in other ways that you can identify?
I mean, honestly, I feel like a lot of this technology to the extent that not all of it's commoditized and you have leaders and stuff, combined with a lot of the incentives on the exchanges to trade at scale, means that depending on the business model, but if you sort of are leaning towards like a market maker type model, that there's big economies of scale, like whether it's technology investment or, like I said, exchange membership or leveraging cost base just operationally. And that has sort of squeezed margins on the middle tier trading firms, and has essentially, like, that's sort of the underlying force behind us trying to become more sophisticated and essentially separate ourselves in different ways than we have in the past, including making use of some of these technologies to augment a lot of our information-based trading that had been more human-driven, discretionary in the past. So that's sort of what's been behind that. I would say I definitely have been surprised how quickly this has been adopted. We regularly meet with the exchanges, and they're starting to offer some of this microwave stuff. And the NASDAQ guys were saying just that there were like 80 guys on their New Jersey links, like guys that you just never would have thought would be trying to use microwaves based on the way that they're trading. So I think because of some of these price points and that the industry is settling down some, at least relative to where it's been, that you are seeing a lot of people just sort of viewing it, I think, as like the industry standard for some things.
And as it relates to regulatory and keeping up, Colin, and I'd like to point out that Colin is a telecom regulator, not a financial regulator, so we won't have another Flash Boys conversation like in the McKay presentation. But from a telecom regulatory perspective, is regulatory kept up? Is it ready for the next phase?
Well, telecoms regulation, I'm afraid to say, it kind of moves at a glacial pace. But I'm happy to say that a lot of the building blocks are there. The radio waves are, the use of radio waves is planned in a great amount of detail, and with regards to what services can use which spectrum. And the spectrum available for point-to-point fixed links is already well planned and well understood. So I think the building blocks are there. If I look at other things which are happening, taking Jeff's a point that Jay made earlier, what we've seen on the approval side is initially 2 or 3 years ago, we were getting network approvals just for long-distance networks to go from point A to point B in the shortest possible path possible. What we're seeing now is that that latency, the low latency is still important, but as Jay says, the operators or the service providers are tweaking their networks to make them more resilient. They're also looking at innovation to try and get more out of their networks, so improving modulation schemes in the modems to get more data through a given megahertz channel bandwidth. Other things that are happening are the networks are being designed more, my interpretation of this is the networks are being designed they're more application savvy. So we've got the traditional microwave, 6, 10, 13, 18 gigahertz links in Europe. For the long distance networks, within the metro areas, people are using the millimeter wave, the 38, 42 gigahertz band, which gives them higher data throughput, but over shorter distances. You wouldn't build that for a long distance network because the cost would be prohibitive. Other things which are happening, Europe's a bit different to North America because we've got so many countries. The regulatory environment in each country is not the same, so while you can use it for the spectrum for fixed services in all of the countries, maybe it's the sole preserve of the military or the broadcast community or the mobile backhaul for the mobile network operators. There is some movement to harmonize that. And also, maybe good news, the CEPT, which is this technical body which manages the harmonization of spectrum use in Europe, they're looking at some of these bands to increase the channel sizes. It's not the people driving it, it's not the financial community, but I think perhaps the financial community can take advantage of that in the future.
Just general evolution and progress.
Yeah, correct. Yep.
Excellent. So let's talk about innovation for a second. We hear lots of talk about lasers and blimps and satellites and lots of other interesting ideas. What's really going to happen? What innovation is really being focused on right now and is coming that the user community in this audience would like to know? And if it includes lasers and blimps, great. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. Let's start with you, Alex.
Well, we've been on a R&D side of things primarily, and that's the things that we have been working on for the past 4 years since we built the first microwave network. We generally like to be the first, maybe not the fastest, but I believe that in general, if trying to be the fastest is a highly capital-intensive endeavor, trying to be the first is often less capital-intensive, but obviously more risky. But this is where we like to play, and we've have already completed a number of prototypes for things that can be put in production when somebody signs on a dotted line. For example, we can talk about like New York to London using over wireless. There is multiple ways to skin the cat, and if a customer wants to do it right now, they can go to Lockheed Martin and buy a couple of blimps. It's going to cost $1 billion and take 3 years. So technology is here. The question is, can this be done? The risk to a price trade-off in such a way that the price will be acceptable to the customer, who will have a giant advantage over everybody else on a new path for a couple of years until it takes for the next company to follow up. And I think that the timing works in such a way that as soon as somebody sees that people are doing this, everybody will jump in. So there is also a little bit of like secrecy. People don't want to talk about what exactly they're doing, because as soon as somebody sees that this is feasible, everybody will follow upon. Like, because right now people, if you say that I want to do it with balloons, oh, that's crazy. Which is the same answer as we've heard 5 years ago when I made a pitch for New York to Chicago over wireless. Oh, how is that going to work? How are we going to get frequency? How are we going to get all the towers? That's not real. But as far as what's actually going to happen, I believe certainly within 5 years we will have somebody who will build New York to London. The technology, it's very hard to predict what will end up being the selected technology, but it certainly will be balloons. Probably it could be tethered balloons, it could be free-flying balloons, and the technology is here from us and from Lockheed Martin. It's a question what the customers want as far as the certainty of completion versus the price on order of magnitude. Or
have you penciled out what the balloons cost?
I can say that we've looked at the commercially available solutions, and it's an upwards of 100 million to 500 million to make this work.
That's all?
Well, I think that's a little expensive. But on the other hand, this is if you think about what Hibernate is doing. Hibernate puts in allegedly 500 million to that cable between New York and London.
The undersea cable.
Yes. You can, to me, this makes no sense because you can do something like the same thing for the same price with the same certainty at the same time with far lower latency from a vendor that's, Lockheed Martin. Or, what we are doing, of course, is the price tag. What for our solution is in $10 to $20 million, and it could be built, it will be operational, and it's just a matter of time before somebody decides that it's time to do this.
Thank you. Jay, you also run a service provider company, and the look on your face says you have a little different opinion. So I think the audience would enjoy hearing that also.
Well, yeah, I'm going to take a cut at this in two different directions. I think first to say what we're doing. I'm not smart enough to know what's going to happen in 5 years' time, so I'm not even going to go there. But I will say over the next 1 to 2, we will be bringing technology to market in licensed wireless, millimeter wave and microwave. To the point of regulatory, the one weak point in microwave that exists today is, I think Colin said it well, there's a lot of small channels, so you're kind of bandwidth limited to your options there to maybe 100 or 200 megabits per second and still having a low latency appliance. What you can, though, have is more availability, straighter paths, tougher routes, better equipment capabilities with more features. And those are things on the microwave side of NexxCom that we are developing today. We're also, for our microwave and our millimeter wave routes, investing in private assets with tower providers to straighten the lines. There are just some unfortunate realities that towers don't exist where you want them. So it's a really low tech, but an obvious and easy and definable way of getting from A to Z more usefully. On the millimeter wave side, again, some of the same basic schools of thought. More power, more bandwidth, and at millimeter wave, you have the advantage of having 10 gigahertz of adjacent spectrum in 2 5 gigahertz channels, which gives you the capacity to do oodles, which is an engineering term, of bandwidth. We're going to start with 10 gigs as the next thing that comes to market. But we're going to feather into that because there are some weather perturbations that affect both technologies, not just millimeter wave, that will let you, the user, know when a NexxCom network might be failing, why it might be failing, and better yet, what are your competitors' networks doing so you can have some intel that you can use in your trading strategies. Again, the key thing there will be shortness, power, performance on the bandwidth side, and those kinds of features. As to some of the things with lasers and balloons, I don't even want to fathom a truck roll for a balloon in the North Atlantic. So the build cost as an aside, the OpEx on something like that could be devastating, not to mention the downtimes and the outages, very undeterministic and highly unpredictable. I agree with Alex, fundamentally it can be done, but I would argue that because it can be done doesn't mean that it should be done. I think that there's an argument that hybrid fiber wireless systems are really the better approach for getting over large bodies of water, certainly from a reliability standpoint, and I really don't know how to comment on the Hibernia thing. As for lasers and everything else, all I will say is flux capacitor, Mr. Fusion. I mean, you can look at the battery of laser companies who have come and failed. There's oodles of them too. Not 10 gigabits worth, but more than a handful. And laser is just a great science when it's put through a glass conductor, wrapped in cable, and buried as fiber optic. That's where it belongs. So from that standpoint, I don't see that as being viable. If you look at the physics, and we actually have a paper coming out to this effect later this month, it will address millimeter wave versus a free space optic or laser technology. And it gets into the physics, a link budget, what's possible. And you have to remember that with laser, you're looking at something you could point at a screen with. Birds, dust, fog, splashes of water, any kind of humidity, vibration, perturbations of that happen in the environment which are not regulated or tracked by the ITU become a complete undeterministic factor in those networks. So from that standpoint, it's a great marketing idea, but that's the extent of it. It's a great marketing idea.
Thank you. So we focused with Alex and Jay on the bandwidth and the long haul, so to speak. How about the rest of the network connection to make a trade work, the equipment in the LAN, in the colo? Dan, Matt, do you have any comments on innovation that might be coming or that you've asked for or you're hoping for?
You know, talk about some low latency technologies. I mean, you know, we're certainly seeing demand for just bigger and bigger bandwidth in general. You know, look at you know, 10 gig fiber connection from, you know, Chicago to anywhere is still pretty pricey. But yet we, you know, us and many other firms we're moving and saving so much data. You know, to use the buzzword big data. I mean, it's here. I mean, you know, we're moving around so much data that there is a need for tremendous amounts of more traditional bandwidth. There's no question about that. Yes, it's not necessarily as sexy as microwave stuff, but it's a serious business need for us.
So
you know,
more bandwidth in the lower latency, like from microwave or something, or
no,
more
not
bandwidth
necessarily.
even
No,
on, even
latency.
on the more.
You know, latency insensitive bandwidth, I would say it is, just to be able to move data around for research purposes is something that's, yeah, you know, I think a lot still could be done there.
Okay.
Storage, you know, typical, you know, you see a lot of, you know, some, you know, cloud storage is still prohibitively expensive from, you know, a downloading standpoint at least. You know, it's fine for archiving. But for doing research, it doesn't work very well. I think there could be great innovation there and some good, you know, you think there would be the scale to have some good service providings there. So,
Excellent. Thank you for stepping out of just the bandwidth piece, so adding some other flavor for everybody. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
I actually
Matt,
just
do a great job there.
feel like I would weigh in and actually just like echo those sentiments that, you know, we're having to like upgrade the bandwidth that we're using, not low latency, get parallel lines just because there's so much data coming out. We're producing more data than ever, meaning, you know, taking market data in, storing it, decorating it, republishing, calculating things, publishing. So whether it's traditional bandwidth or microwave bandwidth to allow us more opportunities to expand sort of what we're using lower latency feeds for, I think those are the biggest things. We're not like, the microseconds definitely do matter, but sort of like I said earlier, you know, we find that there's a lot of really non-deterministic stuff in a lot of the exchanges, matching engines and things like that, we're just like a little more cost sensitive, you know, rather than trying to be a leader on this front.
Excellent. And Colin, do you have anything to add?
Well, the good news is that the regulatory framework exists for the blimp type application. It exists today. Balloons are called HAPs in regulatory speak, high altitude platforms. The other observation I've got is that I mentioned earlier that the networks are, and this might be a misinterpretation by me, but my impression is they're becoming more application specific. So the metro areas are very high bandwidth, the long haul are better bandwidth, or better propagation, travel longer distances, but it's smaller bandwidth. I would add that there are other ways to travel long distances with microwave rather than HAPs. Those are available today, the technology exists today, but the trade-off is that you've got much reduced bandwidths, yet you've got kilohertz rather than megahertz. But if there's an application there, there's a technical solution which exists today.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I think we've only got about 6 minutes left, and we want to leave a few minutes for questions. So I'll just ask them to go down the path. And Jay, we'll start with you because you actually said you weren't smart enough for 5 years, but 1 to 2. Do you want to summarize what you said? What kind of innovation is coming out? What's the key innovation?
Thank you for remembering the
years?
fact that I'm not smart enough for 5 years. I really appreciate that.
Well, 1, 2, 5. If you do 1 to 2 and you're perfect, that's smart enough for me.
Well, I'll go back to the answer and kind of drive the point home in summary. Over the next 24 months, we will, over all the paths that we're doing in this vertical for low latency, have the following truths. One is we will hit asymptotes of latency on that path, meaning straightest path, best overall engine to drive the path and the radio for its architecture, and we will grow bandwidth. We will do that while reducing the cost of the bit to the client, and we'll be delivering that bit with at least a 3 nines availability, which is about the real zenith of what a wireless unprotected network can do. People who try to tell you 5 nines, ask them to pass the pipe, because they're definitely smoking something.
Thank you. Alex, do you want to summarize 1 to 2 years? What do you think is going to happen?
I actually completely agree with Jay. That's where we are all going. There is not going to be much differentiation between the networks in 2 years. Everybody will be within 1% of latency, and not much. The exchange latency will dominate everything else. And I also think that we will see the pricing for private capacity drop quite a bit, because honestly, if there is 12 networks all built or almost completed, there is far more capacity than there is customers, and people will sell microwave capacity at a cost that approaches the fiber capacity. For example, the lead services from general providers, like when we are talking the networks that are slower, they will be priced at a significant discount, which is how we are selling our existing 5-year-old network, and that's where we're going to see is that the price. Everybody will sell bandwidth, and the bandwidth the price will be the inverse of the latency discount.
Okay, thank you. Colin, do you have especially with your regulatory angle, do you have a prediction or what you see, or is there something regulators are going to do to help us?
So I agree with what Jay's been saying about the sort of evolution of the technology and what you can do with the spectrum that's available. As I mentioned in my opening comments, there won't be a great deal to change in the regulatory environment that I can foresee. The planning for regulation of radio waves is a long and slow process. One thing I mentioned was that there is some appetite to look at larger channels in the microwave space within Europe, and I think that will be to the advantage of this community. That's the only obvious thing at the moment.
Thank you. So in my evil plan, I let the 2 user representatives hear the service providers answer first. So in reflecting on what their answers were, if you have an opinion of what's going to happen in 1 or 2 years, or if you'd like to prioritize everything you heard and make an appeal to everybody here to do something for you in the next 2 years, what would that be?
I can take it. So I guess sort of along the lines of what Jay said, it seems like you're getting more availability to a more broad user base for some of these really pretty brand new technologies, at least with this application. I expect that to continue as far as further sort of commoditizing some of these things. And I would just say, like, as much as that does sort of, you could argue, level the playing field, I think it's just another factor where some of this technology continues to sort of stratify the industry as far as types of approaches to trading, business models, ways to risk manage that sort of you either can or can't do, whether you're going to make certain levels of investment. That's sort of what we're seeing on the business side.
Thank you. And Matt, you're in the worst possible spot, the last seat.
Okay, can I say something I want to see, or maybe it's a question?
Please. Yeah, please. So you've heard what they've said. Give them a
Vortex
challenge.
waves. Vortex waves.
I have no idea. Are you talking about quantum entanglement or?
No, vortex waves. So spinning the waves, we get infinite bandwidth.
Oh, yes. It is possible. Very short range. We're talking meters, hundreds of meters. Not beyond that. We've looked at that. Not really possible.
It's just not possible, or just hasn't been done yet.
I think it's fundamental physics, honestly.
That's disappointing.
Thank you. What an awesome way to end the innovation conversation. That's awesome. We have a minute or two left. I kept looking around. It looks like we kept your attention. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask the panel before we end? You certainly can grab them afterwards, but does anybody have a group question? Excellent. Thank you.
I don't know if this is a difficult question or not, but with a couple of the exchanges jumping in on the game, and I know they're paying other people to build their networks, do you think that's going to get in the way of this? You're saying that the prices are going to come down, it's going to be more competition, more of a product that we can buy. But if an exchange comes out and says, you can't get on my roof, you need to go 2 miles down the road, that last mile of fiber is going to make you the second fastest RF network in that, for that point to point. Do you guys think that's going to be a problem?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack at that one, and the answer is an emphatic no. It is a free market still. As far as I can tell, we're not trading in communist areas, so it's going to be the best man wins. As a practical matter, though, when you look at the real value of what it means to be on the roof versus being just a few feet away or maybe a couple yards away with a short, dark fiber tail, it's maybe a microsecond, maybe two. So if you go back to the basic core principles of quality and what that maybe microsecond or two might be worth, if they don't provide a quality service, if it is not one that is market contemporary, then it will lose. And I'll be blunt, if you are interested, I would encourage you to check out a paper we just wrote to this subject. It's been published yesterday, and it really talks through quality in certain networks that are being done by certain exchanges, names not to be mentioned here, but the fact pattern is there are networks up right now that we're aware of, and we've heard the feedback that they're not available. Not available meaning you can't buy them, meaning they're installed, but not working very good. So you have to have that capability and the quality for it to really matter, and I don't think it's going to be a game changer.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind commenting on that too. I mean, I think with exchanges, open up the rooftops. I think they if they do that, they got to do it in an equitable manner, and particularly with when you talk about private bandwidth, if they do that and they can't, it's not available to everyone, it's a PR nightmare for any specific exchange. For an exchange to be offering, exclusive access to market data like that, something that's kind of infinitely scalable, that's fine. But, with the kind of, the regulatory environment, kind of the public drumbeat and stuff, to the extent that anyone offers exclusive access, that's probably a big problem, unless there's just so much bandwidth, it's widely available.
Thank you. Did you have something quickly, Alex?
Yeah, I think it's a question whether they could or they would. Could they? Sure. If NICE at MAWA, the shortest point that they used to hand off was, I think, 50 miles away from MAWA. If NICE gave roof rights to somebody exclusively, then they could screw everybody else. So yes, they could.
Another technical term.
But the technical term. But would they? That's yeah. Like nobody, like CME has been equal length fiber just to make sure there is parity. So I don't think this is realistic. I don't think the exchanges are that desperate or that greedy to invite more scrutiny than they already have.
Thank you. I hope we answered your question. Are there any other questions? There's a hand back there.
Great. One last question here.
I was going to keep going until you stopped me.
Sorry, just Toby Williams, EU Networks. I was just going to add to that last discussion that actually in London, the LSE does offer its own service, and that has exclusive access to the roof. So,
and it was built by Jay, but I think everybody already knows that. So,
yeah.
Thanks for the free press.
So when you're saying it's unlikely, it's actually the case that there is an exchange out there offering RF on an exclusive basis to their rooftop.
Yeah, and I think they don't. It generally won't be a problem until and with millimeter, maybe it never will be a problem, just because you can do so much bandwidth. But if they get to a point where you just can't get any, that's where they run into an absolute PR nightmare. Because then you've got, I don't know, go back to the trading floors then, you got to buy a seat, and you know, defend your 3 square meters there or something, you know.
So you cut me off?
Yeah, we got to
Okay.
get to the next panel, but I'm sure gentlemen will be available for any questions afterwards.
So thank you for
thank
your
you very much.
attention. I hope that we met your objectives of sitting through this panel. Thank you guys very much for your work and your frank comments, and enjoy the rest of the show.